The crash that crafted modern finance, Florence's medieval meltdown. Before Wall Street, before the IMF, before central banks, there was Florence. In the 1340s, three medieval financial super companies collapsed. But this wasn't a simple tale of failure. It was a strategic reset that let oligarchs survive, rebrand, and quietly re-emerge wealthier than ever. And if you stay until the end, you'll understand why this tactical retreat was so important. Strategies that are still utilized today. Florence's financial empire. Florence wasn't a port, it had no army, but in the early 14th century, it commanded Europe's financial flows. Its elite banking families, the Bardi, Peruzzi and Accioli, developed an early version of international finance, with offices in London, Bruges, Avignon, Cyprus and Naples. They managed royal treasuries, collected taxes and ran entire sectors like grain and wool. By 1310, the Peruzzi company alone held 103,000 gold florins in capital. That sum, as Raymond de Ruver shows in The Rise and Decline of the Medici Bank, would equate to hundreds of millions of dollars in modern purchasing power, enough to fund armies, control food supply, and influence entire kingdoms. Sovereign lending, credit with conditions. These firms lent to royalty, yet they were not passive lenders. Their loans came from extractive conditionalities, much like modern IMF-style bailouts. The Bardi and Peruzzi didn't just fund Edward III's war machine. They tied loans to wool exports, customs revenues and crown jewels to repayments. In the Kingdom of Naples, they collected taxes, managed salaries and monopolized the grain trade. In the book Medieval Super Companies, Edwin Hunt shows these firms weren't reckless. They were architects of a high-risk, high-control system. Collateralized lending, revenue control, and geopolitical leverage were all part of their model. Just like today, finance wasn't just about money, it was about power. Collapse, crisis, or calculation. Between 1343 and 1346, all three super companies failed. Edward III's delays in repayment played a role, but it wasn't a naive blunder as de Ruver and Hunt outline. These firms used commender contracts, an early form of limited liability, financial agreement where one party provided capital and another managed trade or business operations, sharing profits but limiting the investor's liability to the amount they invested. They segmented ledgers across branches and locations and transferred assets to insulate core family wealth. Much of their capital was moved into commodities, bullion, or into the hands of trusted kin and fiduciaries before public collapse took place. Their downfall was partial, controlled, and survivable, but for the broader economy, it was devastating. With credit frozen, grain contracts failed, trade slowed, tax farming collapsed in Naples, industrial output in Florence contracted, and the population starved. According to Hunt, the Florentine banking collapse of the 1340s devastated urban economies. Cities such as Naples, Siena, and Pistoia, reliant on Florentine credit and the grain trade, were hit hard, experiencing sharp price increases as supply shortages bit and hoarding and speculation intensified. This financial implosion hollowed out urban life. Towns dependent on Florentine credit and food trade suffered severe population losses. This script may sound medieval, but the pattern is familiar. Like the Bardis' control over English wool, modern creditors demand privatization or austerity in exchange for loans. Like Florentine oligarchs who transferred wealth offshore, modern firms move capital into shell companies and safe havens. And like then, when the system collapses, those holding cash and commodities, not debt, are the ones left standing. Florence Rebuilds, the rise of the Medici. After the collapse, members of the Bardi and Peruzzi families re-entered Florentine politics and commerce within a generation, often under new business names, suggesting their capital remained intact. The Accioli also thrived in Naples and Greece. Their discreet return to elite life reveals that their ruin was more reputational than actual. Financial collapse functioned less as an end than as a strategic reset, an oligarchic rebranding. History doesn't repeat, it rebrands, emerging from a fog of planned obsolescence. So Florence's financial legacy survived the 1340s banking collapse as the Medici, who were tied to the Bardi through a 1310 marriage, emerged as a dominant force by the late 14th century. The Medici forged a centralized family-driven banking empire that blended finance with political dominance, capitalizing on the crisis lessons to rule Europe's wealth. The collapse cleared the playing field, and the Medici were to truly rewrite the rules. Why collapse was the key to survival. In times of crises, credit is toxic, while cash is truly king. For who would wish to be a creditor when the Black Death struck in 1348, just 2 years after the last of these firms seemingly went bust? Tangible assets, the key to survival. According to Hunt and Deruva, Florence's super companies moved into tangible assets to outlast turmoil. As urban economies crumbled, they channeled wealth into gold, silver, and commodities like wool and grain. Deruva notes the Florentine gold florin's global acceptance and stability made it a vital hedge, securing elite wealth amid the collapse. Control of grain meant control of survival, while wool, a Florentine-managed export, surged in value after the plague due to labour shortages as the population contracted. Commodities could be bartered, stored or sold. They were far safer than risky paper credit. They were necessities and they were inflation-proof. 14th century oligarchs went liquid and tangible. Those with bullion or grain could hold wealth in their hands as land and property prices collapsed. A crash that crafted the future. Florence's 14th century collapse wasn't a failure of finance. It was a transformation, a crash that cleansed the old system, allowing a new consolidation of control and the foundations of so-called capitalism to emerge. Though in reality, oligarchism is a far better description. It's a crisis which emphasizes the power of tangible wealth over paper, a time when public ruin masked private continuity. This was not the end of banking, it was its rebirth, and in many ways, its blueprint. In the 2008 financial crisis, major banks that had over-leveraged themselves were bailed out with public funds. Executives kept their bonuses, losses were absorbed by taxpayers, the system reset, but oligarchs were shielded. Collapse can clearly serve as camouflage. It allows bad assets to be purged, liabilities to be offloaded, and power structures to remain untouched. So the next time you hear of a banking crisis, it's worth asking, is this a real collapse or just another chapter in a very old playbook? Thanks so much for joining me. Do consider subscribing, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.